Thank you for joining us. Warm welcome to those that haven't seen us before, and heartfelt thanks to those that know what we do and still want more. My introduction to the Mace was 15 years ago through Jake Shannon out in Southern California. I had seen maces, just like most wrestlers had, used as kind of just a mystical tool among old-timey legends, and then people up to Karl Gotch swinging these gigantic maces seemingly effortlessly. When I found Jake, the couple times that we got to practice, it was really eye-opening. The mace felt more like a person than any implement that I had trained with. And even as bad as we were at it at the time, I knew there was some value there. So we started detailing it out, fell in love with it as both a strength tool and an accessory tool, and then now 15 years later, here we are. The other thing that kind of cemented the interest was an old documentary called The Physical Body, in which the documentarian went to India, filmed some wrestling groups, and all they did for conditioning, all they did for strength work was drag their wrestling fields with heavy metal sleds and swing gigantic maces. These are thin, well-muscled people that moved with an ease that was impressive just to look at. So our interest from the mace came from a martial arts standpoint, and then once we started learning about its unheralded properties as a strength tool and positional reinforcement for many things that we do in conventional lifting. So tonight we're going to look at primarily strength accessories with the mace. One of the things that we look for is consistency in inconsistency. People have figured out ways to accessorize many, many things. But even in all those advancements, we still see the same types of injuries in many types of athletes. Part of that is just that a lot of what we do is hard on the human body. But it isn't an imperfection in the human body that causes those continuous inconsistencies. In our opinion, it's a lack of ability and knowledge on how to accessorize them. The mace is filling an interesting role for us in that realm. The maces, alongside heavy kettlebells, are also proving excellent accessories to all of our primary lifts. Often mistaken for us not lifting barbells. We lift barbells all the time, well and heavy. It's the thing we post about the least because it's the thing everyone else posts about the most. All of the movement patterns that we use in kettlebell and mace lifting transfer directly to the barbell, and a lot of the ticks on the dial that are impossible to locate with a straight object are very possible to locate with an offset object, with a unilateral type object. One of the things we've found most specifically is people's addressment of bracing has improved significantly based on the demands of the mace and the length of the lever. We know for a fact that barbells will always be the heaviest and also the most stable. We know that kettlebells will always be a little bit lighter and a little bit less stable. And then we know that the maces will be the lightest actual weight, but the heaviest relative weight, and by far the least stable. So, in and of itself, we have found the most complete animals are built with a sensible, detailed, brutal mix of the three. Moving into today, the first thing we'll look at is the mace shovel, which happens from a hinge, same as our deadlift, same as our kettlebell swing, same as good morning, same as pendulum row. Accessorizing things in the same main strategy is going to transfer to them so directly, and we see it all the time in here. We're also seeing it in a lot of our people training in these modalities elsewhere. The shovel will set up in our hardest hinge, and the The handle of the mace is going to go in my pocket. The right is over the right, the left is over the left. And once I lock my feet into the ground and wind everything up from the floor, I'm going to think about broadening my chest and squaring my shoulders. As I stand to throw the mace overhead, I'm going to wait for my hips to hit my hand, similar to the timing of most of the other lifts we do, either ground to shoulder or kettlebell swings from the hip. Once the mace moves off the hip, both arms straight and hard, and we'll stop at the top with straight, strong arms. So the bottom arm is the lever, the top arm is straight and strong the entire time. No wiggling. This shouldn't be a bent arm lift. This should be a straight arm with a lever at the end. The overhead position is train tracks, not a tightrope, so left is over the left, right is over the right. And then the handle comes right back to your pocket on the way down. If we look at that in relationship to a deadlift, and then also in relationship to a kettlebell swing. Once we've found our hardest hinge, the mace is also an excellent tool at allowing us to sink into that position and practice bracing the floor. So for people who are still learning about the hinge, or they're having trouble figuring out exactly how far down or back their hips should go, once we've found what feels stable on the ground, a great way to double check is to put the mace across our back into a good morning position. Attach 3 points, and then we'll hunt for that perfect hinge. If I lose spinal position or I round out, I know that I've either not been trying hard enough or I broke position. Once we've standardized the shovel, the first pressing accessory we'll use is just the shovel press. Starts overhead, and just like this science drawing, can be handled in any angle that you feel you need accessorizing. So, if we press straight up and down a lot, primarily kettlebell people, the thumb is going to be standardized to the back. This makes it an excellent press for anyone with a hot shoulder, or anyone that never presses in these ranges and needs to accessorize. The bottom arm drives straight the entire time. Feet are locked into the ground. And I'm going to pull my right hand down to what would be the kettlebell rack position. Both arms are pressing, only one arm is moving. Once we've practiced from the front, you can oscillate any tick on the dial, provided your feet stay square and you can maintain strong spinal position. So especially for rotating sports, throwing sports, all of the Mace really transfers to combat sports seamlessly. We can start turning any angle that we can't approach with any other tool. Holds are valuable here, presses are also valuable. Success and safety in both are governed by a hard, straight bottom arm. The only time we've seen anyone lose control of this, and even in losing control of it, it's still the safest pressing implement we've ever seen, is when the bottom arm is soft. If we drive that thing straight and lock it out, it provides an excellent amount of control for this arm. Quick story. Last week we met and trained with someone with a full AC separation. This is not me recommending that you press with an AC separation. However, he's still training, especially doing some martial arts, and we were able to mace press him with no pain in an absolutely excellent position, and similar to the way that we figured this press out, which was me having a torn labrum and still needing to perform pressing movements, that's going to allow him to recuperate and rebuild without needing surgery. So we're pleased with the overhead press. We're pleased with the option of oscillation as far as you can keep your spinal position and your feet locked into the ground. And then the other sneaky adaptation is the narrower your hands get, the heavier the press gets. So if you only had one tool and you needed to make it more difficult, sneak your hands in together. A phrase we use is tip to tail tension. The Mace lifts, particularly the presses, and most particularly the front press, which we'll go over next, require tip to tail tension. If anything is soft, the press will move slow. So it's a great way to teach people how to brace in a fat and not tall position. I would ask if there's any questions, but there's no one here except these little robots. Apparently they can't laugh at me either. Once we've pressed overhead and warmed up with things like push-ups, and we know for a fact that both of our pushers and pullers are strong and safe, we're going to lift the Mace up into the same front rack. And now we're just going to adjust into any tick of a forward press. The only angle that we're not going to hit is 100% parallel, because that's the one that we hit with the barbell. So, bracing on the ground with the same straight, strong, anchored arm. The amount of challenge that pressing 18 pounds is directly in front of you at that angle has confused a lot of people that we put this on in the last couple of months. I'd like to thank our friend Jerem from Alaska, Anvil of Crom, and then Sky at Vengeance in Nashville for helping us focus group this press. Two really strong dudes, both struggled with this press for different reasons, and were both extremely impressed at what they thought it could do for their primary sports. Lighting each corner, when we only primarily light the main room, brings everything together in a way that we're starting to see extremely profoundly in a lot of the normal people that we train here. While the final number on the bar is never the point for us, performance is undeniable, and when we put a piece together that we can see directly transferred to something else, that is a successful mission. The Mace overhead press and also the Mace front press fall strongly into that category. The front press, additionally, the narrower it is, the harder it is. And then this is where you'll start having to find out what tick on the dial works and which doesn't. I know if I externally rotate another 5 degrees, there's no way I'm going to press this. So, in hunting progress, I'm going to move just inside that flawed end range and practice pressing from there. Once I've greased that groove, then the next one will become present. When I first started practicing this press, I could barely get it out in front of me all the way and pause with any weight at any angle. And since then, I've built up those little pieces of strength in places that they were falling behind. So, with the Mace front press, the bottom arm stays straight the entire time. We're fat and not tall. And as we drive out, we're going to also think about pulling back. If you drive out and soften the tiniest bit, position will break. So, the press is also a pull. Address it as such. As far as when to use these and for what, we do more dexterity-based stuff and accessory-based stuff later in the week. Everyone has their own strategies on that. Because of the fact that the Mace is relatively light, but extremely positionally taxing, it makes a great accessory on a heavier day, and it also makes a great addition later in the week, heavier. The relativity of the weight, I believe, is the biggest value of the Mace. I believe it's also the unsung hero of the Mace. People lift light maces because they haven't really addressed a lot of details of the application and miss out, I believe, on a lot of the value of the heavier implements. Once we've overhead pressed and front pressed and performed proper shovel, a very simple compound movement is a half shovel into either an overhead or a front press. Still guided by that hard, straight lead arm. As soon as that lands in the rack, I'm driving with both arms and then finishing the press. We like to consider a stopped 1/1000 overhead as the end to any press. And make sure you're addressing the weight on the way down with the same care that you addressed it on the way up. With the pressing accessories, because they're light but extremely taxing, anytime we're putting those into a weightlifting day, it's a short rep scheme. 3s, maybe 5s at the absolute most, and then maybe lighter and more towards the end of the week when we'll practice a lot of the other rotational stuff with the Maces. The rotational benefits are what the Mace is primarily touted for, very rightly. Nothing else can cover the lateral angles like the Mace. Nothing else requires midline stability like that. It's because the lever is so long. We started putting the pieces together that level of strength and motor control and power dexterity had to be applicable in a more linear way. After developing a lot of the positions that we use in Mace Lifting now, we realized that any tiny adjustment that we made, we could feel, and if we couldn't feel it, then we were already covering it with another tool. So, a lot of the value of the mace for us is just filling in the blanks, making sure that we can address anything that anyone comes in with, and that we can scale all the way up and all the way down without simply saying more weight or changing a movement pattern. When addressed like a strength tool, the mace provides so much that nothing else can in terms of positional reinforcement, helping beginners standardize their movements, and essentially safety-proofing things like a press. We also use maces in squats and squat accessories with a lot of success. Again, what we're talking about is a light weight that is extremely relatively heavy, especially when at the end of its absolute lever. One of the first squats that we do very simply is just from the same upright position that we will hold outright to condition ourselves We can also shorten and straighten the arms like a heavy kettlebell swing. If needed, we can space the arms, straighten them both. That will teach tension if people are missing something in one of the other more stable implements. All of us that have trained with and trained others with a barbell have seen people get away with a lot of things because that bar creates so much stability. That's even possible to get away with some kettlebell handle positions. It is nearly impossible to get away with the mace. The amount of bracing and tension that I put into light, aggressive reps with this 8-kilogram mace, to me is an indicator that it's doing a lot more than it might look like it's doing on paper. If we still have someone that's missing an upper body cue in the squat, something we'll ask them to do and start with a sledgehammer is tip the mace forward just the tiniest bit. If there is one single soft spot in the whole system, the tipping forward will find it. I'm going to do one and miss it, then I'm going to pick it back up and get it. And what we're going to watch is as soon as I soften, the weight wants to go right to the ground. All I did was sip a breath, and the mace went. If I sipped a breath with my 2-rep max on a barbell, the bar may not go, but something else might. So we find that this is an extremely important and safe time to learn about bracing at all costs until you're standing back up. One thing that we see people do all the time is stare at the weight. It's really tempting. I do it in the front pendulum a lot. I try and make sure and do both so I don't get used to one over the other. But we encourage people not to stare at the weight. One thing that we're pretty dead set on is heads in the middle. Keeps the straightest, strongest spine. And we want the mace to reinforce that, not undermine that. So if you're squatting with the mace in front and the weight up high, don't stare at the weight. The next one will be a squat in a single arm out in front of us, considering this same type of angle idea. Most of us are going to find it relatively easy to squat a light to moderate weight in this exact position, because this is somewhere that we work. As we start oscillating, we start feeling different muscles engaged, and it becomes much more difficult. I'm always sure to brace the non-working arm because we want to make a complete circuit if we expect it to move with strength and power. So if I'm squeezing the heck out of this, and this is wiggly, it's not going to be heavy and it's not going to be fast. And if what I'm hunting for are the weak spots, I have to give them a chance to present themselves. So as I'm holding that mace, if this arm is wiggly, everything is going to present as weak. If this arm is locked up and braced, my shoulders retracted just as the other side, I'll start to find what's weak and be able to address it with a simple version like this. This is also a safe, appropriate time to practice training your internal rotation by just tracking the hand on the mace. The goal here is creating and reinforcing stability where there may not be any, so we don't want to hold as hard as we can, we just want to track and then find where those internal rotators need to work. If you're staying away from a labrum, you're staying away from AC, something like that, then one of the values of the mace is not making you go there. So no internal rotation in that case, neutral and out. With that same squat, as soon as we start letting the weight move away from us, everything again changes. And those are valuable and safe experiments that we are not able to perform with any other tools. Mostly because we're either locked into position or the lever doesn't allow that type of rotation. So let's hunt the weaknesses and find them and address them. Or don't. When we start looking at a shovel and then moving down into our positions where we can either press or squat, one of the games as we're transitioning position, just like we do with some of our sit-up complexes, is never really softening up completely. If we're doing anything, we're sipping, not gulping breaths, and it just teaches a lot about relative tension. Maneuvering a light but really challenging and uncooperative weight is a lot like sport, definitely a lot like combat sports, and one of our favorite things for putting on for simple conditioning, people that are going to be kicking and punching and need to make sure that they can stay braced up while staying relaxed. Something else that we like to use with the mace squat is a panic at the bottom. When we talk about panicking the weight up, we talk about bracing and holding in strong positions to reinforce both the ranges of motion, to reinforce the explosion on the way up, even something simple like a push-up. A panic push-up would keep a 3/1000 hold just over the ground, and then we pop back up to the top. With something like a mace that's light but challenging, the panic at the bottom is a really effective way to get a ton of work out of a lighter weight without breaking position, and while training a lot of the movement patterns that we expect to work heavy and dynamically. We find often people come in, anyone that has prior experience with maces, It happens with kid gloves on. And while we don't necessarily agree with that, we understand it. When people move something to the side for the first time, it's often a direction that they've never moved weight in, often never moved their bodies in. So addressing the mace in an extremely linear way, we also think is going to grease the groove for people to start adding in a lot of the really heavy, valuable rotational stuff that the maces have been used for hundreds of years. Done so too light or unspecifically, a lot of that rotational stuff is probably more harm than good. Performed organized and hard and also relaxed and fluid, it is infinitely valuable, and we see it all the time. People that have trouble figuring out power-y type stuff, once they learn mace front pendulums, back pendulums, 360s, a lot of the power that is required in some of the other tools becomes a lot clearer to them. I don't necessarily know why that is the case. I also think it's quite a confidence issue. Once people have started to safely wield heavy maces, it increases their confidence in all the much more conventional lifts. We'll look at a mace front pendulum. We're not going to get too much into the traditional rotational stuff. We cover a lot of that. Our YouTube features a Mace 360 tutorial that is extremely thorough and gets you all the way to what we're talking about with Mace 360, Mace 10-2s, and all the accessories that lead into that. So today we'll focus mostly on this, but we want to introduce the front pendulum, both as a midline stability, fact check, and also a great accessory that you can add a lot of reps to because it's extremely low attrition, but it's extremely challenging and versatile. So, standing up just like you would for a press, the mace is going to stay very close to your body and swing up to parallel with the floor. From the side, you'll be able to see that my hands are going to be very close to my body. From the front, you just have to take my word for it. And for our purposes, reps count when they're parallel with the floor. When you'll see my hands opening is when we're using that relative tension. It's that moment of clarity, the very same as with a kettlebell swing. The front pendulum is also an excellent warm-up, and it's also an excellent indicator if people understand what broadening their chest means. So if we see anyone do anything mechanically wrong with the front pendulum, it's just rotating over the weight as opposed to broadening through. So a lot of times what we're looking for with the mace is what it can teach us that we can transfer directly to something else. And a lot of the rotational stuff has a postural demand that most people don't think about until it's heavy enough to make them think about it. From the overhead position, the lunge is an excellent level change, provided we're pushing the bottom arm as high as we possibly can. I'm not able to lunge extremely well. I have an injury to my left foot. The only way that I can safely lunge is with something very heavy on one side or a mace in the perfect overhead position. So the mace in the perfect overhead position is my preference because it creates a lot of stability and minimal attrition. So in an area that I'm challenged in and more vulnerable than others, my goal is to get as much as I possibly can out of the least amount of weight. And the mace covers that ground. Something I've had recent conversations about that I very much like the idea when it applies to the maces is addressing the implement like you care about it and like it's valuable to you all the time. This isn't a transition into ceremony of training or anything like that, but a lot of times we see people disregard many of our most valuable tools and strategies simply because on paper it's not enough for them. Part of the way that we elicit so much value out of so much simplicity is that we're addressing every single movement and every single tool as if it's the heaviest of the day or the heaviest of the week or the heaviest of our lives. It's essentially just a global linear progression version of a max effort method. If you address every single tool like it's heavy, and you address every single position like it has the capacity to hurt you, you will get stronger, and there's a considerable chance that you will get hurt a lot less. We found that especially true with the mace. We're able to put a ton of positional demands on people and a ton of bracing demands on people without risking injury and without overloading them when we're already doing a lot more heavy loading with the barbells and kettlebells each week. That's a brief entry into our mace lifting for strength training. We hope you enjoyed it. We hope you'll apply it. And we hope that you'll give us feedback on it. If this goes well, we'll do a very similar one with the more traditional rotational stuff very soon. Thank you for watching. Thank you for supporting us.